had he not gotten injured,
Yeah.
he probably would be a surefire wide receiver one in terms of, does he go to the Jets at 10?
One of the more fun things that we did at the NFL Combine this year was kind of work through that day 2 batch of wide receivers, which was a really extensive conversation. I think we buried 15 minutes into just trying to figure out how we were going to slot 9 different guys on the board, all tightly knit in that day 2 conversation. And since the Combine, we ended up coming back. We found a couple more first-round picks at wide receiver, but it's still a very crowded day 1 and day 2 top 100 crop for pass catchers. And I think what's really interesting is you've seen teams hit outside of the first round and on day 2 on high-level immediate contributors at the wide receiver position. So I'd like you guys to, let's start there. Obviously, fit is going to be important. Landing spot's going to be important. But if you think about the profile of what the guys are who don't get drafted on the first day but find success early on, is there any names from this year's group that come to your mind as somebody who could be that type of guy this year?
But I guess I'll go ahead and get it started, get this conversation going. Y'all know exactly where I'm going with this. I'm going with Cincinnati wide receiver Alec Pierce. I think this guy has the athletic profile that you want. He's 6'3", 200 pounds. He ran a 4.4, and it's also about the class that he's in, right? Like when we ranked our guys, a bunch of our second round guys, they were smaller guys, right? You're talking about Calvin Austin, you're talking about your Sky Moores, even Kyle Phillips. You can throw him in there also, but I think that Alec Pierce has a rare skill set. We talk about being an ex-wide receiver. I know that he has some, you can say body stiffness, but I always like to grade players as far as, does the stiffness prevent them from doing their job? And while it doesn't look great what Alec Pierce runs his route, he gets it done though. And I think this is a guy that showed the ability to make contested catches, and he also can take it over the top too. He's not a home run threat, but he can definitely beat DBs that run 4.5, 4.6. So I think this can possibly be a complete player. And when you compare him to guys like George Pickens and Treylon Burks, I think he's right up there with those guys in the mix to be a high day 2 pick.
I think of a guy like Khalil Shakir from Boise State, someone that could go in the 3rd or 4th round, someone who came from a small school and then showed up at the Senior Bowl and proved that he belonged there and that the lights weren't too big for him. So I think this is a guy who can play core teams. I think this is a guy that can play on the outside and inside. In terms of value, we always speak about value, and I think this is someone that can be a later a guy that goes in the 3rd or 4th round who can somehow ascend to play significant minutes as your 3rd or 4th guy, and who will also be a core teamer and who may be able to give you something in the return game as well.
I want to mention the name John Mechie III out of Alabama, where I brought up a name recently when talking about him, and it was Deontay Johnson, who was another one of those receivers that wasn't a super high pick but found production early on, and Pittsburgh certainly feels like they have a featured part of their passing game. And with John, I love everything about him up until the point where he has to catch a football. And there's just variance. There's variance at the catch point, right? I know that's an issue, right? We get open, catch the football, right? The catch the football is a little bit apart. But to his credit, he separates, right? He gets open a lot, and he's got yards after catch ability to stack and win down the field. So you're going to have to live with some drops and some misplays on the football. But I still think he can be a very productive player in an NFL offense, and that we're not talking about him as a first-round guy, especially after the injury. And so for a team that is going to target a receiver on day 2, he screams the type of player that could come in and really solidify a role and be productive and not be one of those first-round guys.
I think about David Bell from Purdue. I understand this was a guy who didn't run particularly well. He ran in the mid 4.6s, but you watch him in that Purdue offense in a high-volume pass catcher role, even when he overlapped with Rondale Moore. And I thought David was the better receiver. And some of that had to come back to how they decided to use Rondale Moore. If you go back to Rondale Moore's freshman season, that was where you saw the best version of Rondale Moore at Purdue. And as they tried to tailor that role and complement those two skills, I saw more translatability for David in how he was asked to run routes on the outside. And no, He's not going to consistently stack you down the field, but he's a body who I think could run a lot of in-breaking routes. He's fearless over the middle. If you're looking for somebody to help you in the intermediate areas who can win and come back down the stem on the outside and you know he's going to extend and catch the football away from his frame, he's got strong hands. Not necessarily the sexiest athletic profile versus some of the other guys that we're talking about, but David Bell's that one name for me that I'm not going to let the 40 trick me into thinking he's not as good of a football player as I saw on tape.
No, I think that's a really good name, Kyle, and I think you guys know where I'm going to go with this, but I'm going to go with the UCLA's Kyle Phillips. And if you talk about a guy who won't be a day one guy, there's a chance he's not even a day two guy, you know, given his measurables and projecting him as a slot-only receiver. But because he's going to be looked at as a slot only at the next level, whichever team that drafts him is going to have a plan for him. And so if you're a team that needs a slot receiver and you take Kyle Phillips, why couldn't he start day one? Because he's going to fill that specific role. And so for Kyle Phillips, he was a 3-year starter at UCLA, even as a freshman, was really productive, outstanding route runner, really good hands, good body control, good separation quickness. He knows how to get open. He's a very instinctual, savvy player. And so he's going to be a coach's dream. He's going to contribute on special teams because that's the other factor. We start talking about receivers on late day 2, day 3. If they don't contribute on teams, they won't even be active on game day. And so for Kyle Phillips, he's going to be able to cover kicks. He's going to be able to return punts. And then again, his skill set is one that he can just step right into be your slot receiver, catch 60, 70 balls, and you're happy with your 4th-round pick.
How about Velus Jones in that same light from Tennessee? I think he's somebody who ran really well. He ran in the 4.3s. Where did he transfer from?
USC to Tennessee. Yeah.
USC to Tennessee, and you saw the value in the return game for him and what he can do on special teams. And he was another guy like a Khalil Shakir who had a really good week at the Senior Bowl. They were a little quiet on Tuesday. But as that week went on, you felt both of those guys more and more and more and more and more. And when you run 4.3s on top of that, I think Velus Jones is another name to watch as somebody who probably not a top 100 pick, but in that same light of Kyle Phillips, that's my guy in that light that I can see making a significant impact for you pretty early on.
I mean, Jalen Tolbert, South Alabama, certainly comes to mind.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a really explosive player. I think he averaged over like 17 yards a catch at South Alabama. I love his ability to win down the field and catch the ball. Calvin Austin from Memphis is, small, but he's explosive and can create after the catch, win as a punt returner, and win down the field. Strong, confident hands, and DBs just have a hard time staying with him. So I think we've got a pretty deep crop of those players in that, 2nd, 3rd, 4th round range that can come in and be a meaningful option for an NFL passing game.
So let's talk about the 1st round, because this is where it gets really fun. And some of the guys that we have valued in the 2nd round bucket, we know we're going to end up being 1st round picks predictably. And that discrepancy always exists, right? Because we're not focusing through the player evaluation through the lens of a single team. So when you apply a single team look, they're going to want specific things that we can't covet more than others because we got to grade across the whole scale. But I'm really interested to see, A, how many we get in the top 15, and then B, how much teams press at the end of the 1st round, those playoff contenders, team like Kansas City, right, who obviously bid farewell to Tyreek Hill. If the run happens early, do they go for the next guy, even if the value is not necessarily great and draft for need, or do they choose to wait? Green Bay is kind of in the same spot, although they do have 22. But, if Jahan Dotson's the best wide receiver available at 22, do you draft Jahan Dotson if the run goes early and you get 4 that come off the board in the top 20 picks, or do you wait? It's a really fascinating foil for a couple of teams who made the business decision to say, hey, you know what? All-pro receivers, that's cool, but, we'd rather have more flexibility to move with going forward.
I think we're going to see 4 in the top 17, and that's at minimum.
It's a very specific number.
It is a specific number. Because I think about he's picking 17th in the Chargers, and I think, for a receiver like Chris Olave falls, I think he'll be the pick. But the receivers who I am pretty confident will go high is going to be Garrett Wilson, who's my wide receiver one. I think there's a chance he goes in the top 8. Then you got Drake London, who is a really kind of big, powerful receiver out of USC. He's likely going to be a top 13, 12 pick, whatever that looks like. And then Jameson Williams, the big mystery, where had he not gotten injured, he probably would be a surefire wide receiver one in terms of, does he go to the Jets at 10?
Right.
So I'm banking on a team still wanting to secure a talent like Jameson Williams early. So that already gives me Wilson, London, Williams off the board in the top 15. If you're a team like the Chargers or even like a team like the Saints, okay, but we can't take the risk of a Chris Olave falling pass. Boom. Then a team like the Eagles,
Right.
that's where I think we start hearing names like a Treylon Burks or even like a Jahan Dotson start coming into play.
I think that when you think about the top 5 guys, you think of like the Drake Londons, the Garrett Wilsons, Olave, Dotson. I think that a name that certainly needs to be in that mix, man, is Christian Watson, right? I mean, this is a guy who's dynamic, explosive, and his rack ability is as good as any of the top 5 guys, right? And it wouldn't surprise me if a team that was late in the 20s or 30s came up to snag him, because I think his upside is tremendous. And the things that, like the questions you have, about him, can be addressed with pro coaching or whatnot. So I feel like this is certainly a name to watch. He has a great athletic profile and someone who is a explosive and dynamic player, and certainly a name to watch.
Yeah, I mean, we could possibly break a record, and we've all done mock drafts of recent, and the back end of that first round, there's still a lot of teams that can use receivers.
We didn't even mention Dallas yet.
Yeah, that's
too.
what I was about to go through it. Like, you have Dallas, Buffalo is a possibility. You have the Titans. I'm trying to think who else. You have the Packers. That's 4 teams right there.
New
That's
England.
Kansas City,
Yeah, so it's
New England.
So, yeah.
Detroit.
Everybody could use a wide receiver, right? But we don't have 32 of them. So I think that's one of the interesting flaws about this draft is, as we get to that about 19 mark, I think it'll be interesting to see how many receivers actually get pushed up the board, and to see if these teams stay disciplined to their board and be like, you know what, Sky Moore is a second rounder, I'm going to keep him there. Or they're going to be like, you know what, I don't know if I'm going to get to him, right, in the second round and decide to take him. So there may be a record broken as far as how many wide receivers get drafted in the first round.
19 is also a very specific number to invoke here for a landmark. But listen, I think New Orleans, especially with the maneuver that they made to get an additional first-round pick this year and give up one from next year to move up and get 2 top 20 picks. You think about what they lost in Teron Armstead at left tackle, and they're probably hoping that they have a tackle that's there for them. But that other dynamic that we've always known has been missing from this New Orleans offense is somebody opposite Michael Thomas. And they made the decision to bring back Jameis Winston, and what does he do best?
Deep
Shoot
ball.
the ball down the
Deep
field,
ball.
right? So you think about a guy like a Jameson Williams or a guy like a Chris Olave, depending on what order those guys come off the board. And I think that's absolutely in the discussion for, whether that's with that first or that second pick between 15 and 20.
Yeah, the things I think they have potential to get real crazy come draft night, because it's like you say, it's with those first 5 to 10 picks, they don't really set the pace, because like I say, even in the first round, you can make a argument for those teams to take wide receiver, and I think one of the things I was interested to see was about Jameson Williams, right? Because up into the knee injury, he was wide receiver 1, so I kind of want to see if some teams still have him, like, you know what, this ACL injury, we can quickly get over that, because he had the injury, I think it was December, early January.
And he's reportedly ahead of schedule in his rehab.
Yeah, so I mean, he may be there when they go to camp, right? So you're talking about a dynamic playmaker. When will teams jump at him, and then you'll see the domino effect, and it'll just trickle all the way down the draft. So I think that's gonna be one of the funnest things to see about this draft.
I think too that the ACL isn't as much of a concern in this day and time as within the past like 10 or 15 years, where it was almost a death sentence. I think that like there have been so many advancements in that area where people aren't nearly as concerned about a torn ACL now, and the time to recover is shorter, right? Yeah. So I think that there will be teams that won't be scared off by his ACL injury, and teams that will certainly jump on him, because I do think he's probably the best receiver, most explosive receiver in this entire class. I'm
fascinated to see in which order these receivers come off the board, because I think for us as media, Joe always says it, we're scouting in a vacuum, right? Where we can just really look at each individual receiver, judging by their skill sets and their trades and things like that. We're not scouting for a scheme. And we're not scouting for what a team may already have in place at the receiver position. And so because of that, I think we could see, I don't think any of us have Drake London as our personal wide receiver one. There's a good chance he is wide receiver one
Right.
if a receiver needy team wants that and values that kind of bigger, more possession-like, prototypical X on the outside, as compared to a Chris Olave or even a Garrett Wilson, who predominantly don't win in those kind of massive contested catch situations where you need kind of bigger, more physically imposing type of player. I do think there is a top 5 that the league's gonna value. It just, to me, it's just a matter of which order they come off the board.
I agree, and I think that if you ask all 5 of us at this table, right?
It's all different.
Yeah, we may all have a different wide receiver one. and
Okay. Go ahead.
Since you mentioned it, Keith.
Funny you mentioned that. Go ahead.
I'm still going with Jameson Williams. I think he's that dynamic.
Jameson Williams.
Jamison Williams.
Garrett Wilson.
Jameson Williams, wide receiver 1.
Okay. How
Well,
about wide
it
receiver
did-
2? Let's do wide receiver 2. This is where the variety's going to go. Go ahead, wide receiver 2.
Jahan Dotson.
Okay.
Chris Olave.
Chris Olave.
Jameson Williams.
Drake London.
I knew you were
Okay,
saying
there it
that.
is.
Yeah.
So there's a good amount of variety between
Yeah.
our group, right? And kudos for the dramatic effect there. too. I like that. Listen, surplus at any position can be a bad thing for the players involved because it creates a logjam. But it feels like this year at wide receiver, there is the demand
Yes.
that's going to meet that surplus.
Exactly.
And that's why we're having the conversation that we have. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's the order that these guys are going to come. It's not whether or not they're going to come.